Punishments in ancient Greece. There were no lawyers but few judges in ancient Greece. Greece citizens were expected to know the laws of the city and act as their attorney in courts in defense of charges made by others. Nevertheless, punishment varied for different ranks of ancient Greek society. For instance, if any Greek citizen was to be found guilty of a crime, he or she was subjected to punishment considerable to his rank in the society. The big question in this context is, which punishments were there in ancient Greece? How were they administered to people found guilty? And what was the punishment for the worst crime? All these questions are going to give us a fascinating picture of crime and punishment in ancient Greece. Hit the thumbs up, the subscribe button, and the notification bell to get more interesting historical punishments in ancient Greece. In early Greek times, many people lived in small villages and farms. There were relatively few courts and no police in the scattered towns. Therefore, men had to be able to protect both their families and their goods. Oh no! Disputes in this case were settled by threats or by force. This resulted in revenge feuds between families lasting for several generations. As for slaves, they were fined by their masters and executed, or sometimes imposed whippings and beatings. In his words, the poet Homer said, like battle disputes over land and goods could be very violent and frequently ended in bloodshed. In this case, Homer compared a battle between the Greeks and the Trojans to a swarm of hungry flies. Homer knew that land disputes were common and this resulted in deadly fights. However, over time, the Greeks accepted that it was better to settle their disputes peacefully, hence a system of law was developed. In some cities, kings acted as judges, whereas in other cities, people met in assemblies to listen to cases, decide, and give a verdict. All in all, the ancient Greeks took crime seriously, and as a result, people were expected to follow and know the laws of their land. The worst crimes were punished with banishment or death. Ancient Greece imposed fines, imprisonment, a set time of public humiliation in the stocks, limited loss of political rights, total disfranchisement, and exile from the city, which could be amplified with the confiscation of property or the razing of the convict's house. And what about the women? For the women, they could not, of course, be subjected to a loss of political rights, rather they could lose their rights to participate in religious spaces and events. The wrongdoers would simply take themselves into exile such that a defendant in a murder trial was given the chance, after his first speech in the trial, to leave the country if he wanted. The punishment systems were divided into two types, the one cursed upon you by the gods, whereas the other was given by the humans. The punishment was given due to the lack of respect for the concept of law and regulations by the characters in ancient Greek. Draconian Laws. The earliest laws in Greece were passed from one generation to the other by the word of mouth. Ancient Greek at this time had neither official laws nor punishments. The first ever written laws were written down by Draco of Athens in about 620 BC, according to the Roman historian Plutarch. He shows that Draco's laws were very harsh. On the other hand, the Athenian orator Demades said that Draco's laws were written in blood and not ink. Today, we call any punishment that is very harsh draconian. Draconian laws became known for their cruelty. Indeed, death was a punishment for the majority of crimes, including even the pettiest theft. Intriguingly, Draconian law established exile as the penalty for homicide and was the only Draco law that was later kept in force. Draco's laws were not enforced by every free person, but enforced by the powers of the central authority. The city of Athens was a democratic city by 500 BC. The people voted for their leaders to judge legal cases in courts. The trial for severing crimes was held by juries. Due to this system, any Greek citizen could bring charges against anybody and start the trial. In these courts, many people sat to listen to the speeches of the accusers and defendants. There were many different levels within the courts. The jury consisted of 500 male citizens over the age of 30, chosen by many people from the volunteers. Athens used very large number of jurors as part of protection against bribes. After all, who could afford to bribe 500 people? All jurors were required to swear by the gods of Zeus, Apollo, and Demeter, the Heliastic oath. In courts, punishments include death, imprisonment, loss of civil rights, for example, the right to vote, the right to serve as a juror, the right to speak in the assembly, exile, and fines. For an instance, in Socrates' trial, the principal accusers proposed the punishment of death after convicting him to be guilty. The execution of Socrates was accomplished through the drinking of a cup of poison hemlock. In this case, Meletus, a poet, delivered an oral summons to Socrates in the presence of witnesses in court to answer charges of impiety. Contrarily, The Greece citizens indeed showed their willingness to let convicts on death row escape imprisonment and flee into exile. Even convicted murderers who were being held in prison while they awaited execution were expected to make a jailbreak and flee the land. In Hesiod's Theogony and Aeschylus' tragedy, Prometheus' Bond, Zeus holds Prometheus prisoner as a punishment for stealing fire from the gods and giving it to mortals. In Hesiod, as an additional penalty, an eagle eats Prometheus' liver daily, and shockingly, the liver grows every night to be eaten again the next day for eternity. Oh no. This punishment may seem like a fantasy. Unrelated to the real world, it is the ancient Greece civic institution of justice. Prometheus' punishment would have been familiar to Athenian citizens and is regarded as a cruel and frightening punishment. Imposed exile. The delinquents would simply take themselves into exile such that a defendant in a murder trial was given the chance, after his first speech in trial, to leave the country was mandatory. However, exile wasn't the easiest burden to bear because an exile might become a beggar in a strange land, and it would be much worse for an old man to be without a city. Ancient Greece's preference for exile over execution was the best evidence of their desire to use punishment to cure all parties to the wrongdoing. Exiling the wrongdoer in ancient Greece freed the victim and the prosecutor of the anger and put an end to the social disruption in the country. Also, the wrongdoer gained the chance of starting a new life in a context where he would not be the focus of anger and social conflict. This signifies that peace was restored in ancient Greece, and the wrongdoer was also restored to a new life. Exile allowed ancient Greece communities to forget almost entirely about particular wrongdoers and restore a sense of order to the ancient Greece communities. Imprisonment. Imprisonment was used as a penalty in ancient Greece for wrongdoers who were unable to pay their fines. Wrongdoers who could not afford to pay fines were sent to prison for indefinite periods. Interestingly, ancient Greece seems to have developed ways by which such citizens could propose set time limits for their imprisonment to replace their fines. Imprisonment helped communities to forget about particular wrongdoers who disappeared from them, hence allowing them to enter a new community in context in which they would have a new chance at harmony and peace in the country. Barkan saw the use of imprisonment as an additional penalty for the likelihood of general penal imprisonment and used evidence from the oratorical corpus to make an argument therefore. Curses from the gods. The punishment given by the mythical gods resulted in a lifelong of an individual. In the story of Atlas and Prometheus, Atlas was punished to bear the weight of the sky on his shoulder. This punishment was given by the Olympians after they defeated the Titans in Titanomachy. In this case, Prometheus stole fire from heaven and gave it to the mortals. This was a crime in the eyes of the gods. Therefore, he was chained to a remote mountain and Zeus' eagle ate his liver. For all this emphasis on ancient Greece punishments, using penalties such as exile allowed the people to forget all about the wrongdoer. In other cases, ancient Greece preferred to memorialize punishments for eternity. Ancient Greeks developed unbelievable techniques for punishment that drew the attention of the community's memory, whereas others drew on an ability to forget.